Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 80 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Anaheim Ducks, in which the Sharks have lost 5-2. So hot off the heels of a very emotional, very exciting and impressive win just a couple of days ago against the Vegas Golden Knights that put them on the brink of missing the playoffs entirely this season, the Sharks came into this game against the Anaheim Ducks with essentially nothing on the line, and the Ducks came into this game against the Sharks with also essentially nothing on the line, and so it would not have been a surprise to see some sort of massive fall off between these two teams. On top of that, you have to mention that since these two teams are so close into the standings, I believe coming into the night the Sharks led the Ducks by just 2 points, it was theoretically in both teams' best interest to actually lose this game to try and get a better spot in the draft lottery at the end of the season. And so in that way, you could say the Sharks came out the winner here tonight. Having said that, of course, on the scoreboard, the Sharks, of course, did end up losing, and I wouldn't say that they actually played all that bad here tonight. I thought they played a pretty decent game. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they were the better team here tonight, because obviously the Ducks did win, and I didn't feel like it was a game completely stolen by the Ducks goaltender Anthony Stolarz, but the Sharks maybe didn't look as bad as a 5-2 score would indicate. Going into this game, however, the first period, the Sharks did heavily outshoot the Anaheim Ducks, had about 17 shots in the first period, and considering how the Sharks have looked offensively at times this season, where they've literally had entire games with less than 17 shots, twice, I believe, this year, the fact that they managed that many in the first period was rather impressive, though no goals for them. The only goal would actually be from Trevor Zegras to make it 1-0 Anaheim. In the second period, the Ducks would extend that lead, getting goals from Comtois as well as Milano pretty quickly after to make it 3-0 Anaheim. And so the Sharks were going to try and do some sort of Vegas Golden Knights miracle comeback here once more. And it looked like as we moved to the end of the second period that something like that could happen. The Sharks would get a goal from Brent Burns as well as a goal from Scott Reedy. And by the end of the second period, the Sharks were only trailing by a single goal. However, in the third period, the Sharks just couldn't find a way to beat Stolarz. The Ducks would eventually add to their lead and put it back to 2 goals with a goal from Mahura, and an empty netter from Aston Reese would top it all off, and the Sharks would lose it 5-2 with just 2 games remaining on the schedule. Now the Sharks are actually tied with the Anaheim Ducks in terms of point. The Ducks only have a single game remaining, and so we'll see which team actually gets the better draft odds at the end of the year. When it comes to the players to talk about here tonight, we have the top line of Meyer, Hertl, and Barabanov. I wouldn't say that they were consistently super impressive here tonight, but they definitely did have multiple very, very good chances, and so it wasn't any sort of dominant performance when they were on the ice, but they definitely still looked rather solid, I would say. Not a terrible game from them, not that great of a game from them either. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, Bonino, the hot streak finally runs out a bit here, doesn't end up with a goal here tonight, though I would say he did still relatively okay. It wasn't as impressive as he has been over these past few games, which is honestly not that much of a surprise, because anyone who thought really that Bonino's sort of game-by-game value was as high as it has been over the past few games, this is kind of what they should be expecting at this point from Nick Bonino, but still not a terrible game. I actually thought, in particular, Matt Nieto on this second line was maybe the most impressive player on this second line over Couture and Bonino. Nieto had a few very solid chances here tonight. On the third line, and this was probably the line that was the best one for the Sharks, we have, of course, Bordeleau, Gregor, and Balcers. In the past couple of games in regulation, this line hasn't done a ton. Bordeleau obviously was very hyped up after the previous game against the Golden Knights where he scored that shootout-winning goal, but besides that shootout-winning goal, he didn't necessarily do a ton in that Vegas game, but here tonight, he responds, has a very, very solid night, a couple of very good chances for himself, set up a couple of very good chances as well. Balcers hit the crossbar very early on in this game. In particular, I should mention early on in this game, the first few shifts that this line took were all extremely impressive. They were showing off some very good chemistry. Noah Gregor, Bordeleau, Balcers, they seem to just be all on the same page, which is very impressive for a line that has only been together 5 games. I mean, I remember some lines earlier on in the season that were together for a dozen games, a couple of dozen games that never seemed to find themselves on the same wavelength, but this one was just a completely instant chemistry, and it's been very impressive to watch, and I really think Bordeleau is a huge part of that. And so just now 6 games into his NHL career, he's already looking like a very promising young player for the San Jose Sharks. We'll obviously see what happens with the whole training camp and then coming into the next season, and of course having the long strain of an 82 game schedule, because we saw, for instance, how that actually affected Jonathan Dahlen this season, who came out like a house on fire earlier on in the year, playing with Couture and Meyer on that first line. Looked like he could really be, at the very least, let's say a 20 goal scorer on that top line, but the grind of a full NHL season ended up getting to him, and now he doesn't even find himself in the starting 12 lineups, which you can say partially is the fault of Bob Booner not really wanting to play him, but it is also partially Dahlen's fault, who hasn't necessarily given Booner much of a reason to play him in the top 12. So it'll be interesting to see how Bordeleau looks then, but currently in the few games he has played, I have been blown away by how sort of close he is to an effective, being a really strong NHL player already. And when it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, there was a small substitution as Gadjevich ended up back into the lineup over Weatherby. I wasn't too disappointed with this substitution compared to a couple of games ago when Viel actually ended up playing over Weatherby. The reason is that when they made the Viel substitution, the fourth line had played a pretty solid game in the previous one. However, here tonight, the fourth line was probably the Sharks' worst line in the game against Vegas, so I wasn't that disappointed to see Gadjevich come in over Weatherby, and it ended up being a pretty decent substitution, I guess. Gadjevich did have one very strong chance, and then of course Scott Reedy did score a goal in this game, and I thought Chmelevski looked quite solid like he has been, so not a terrible game all around for the fourth line. It will be interesting to see as we go into the next game and these last couple of games of the entire season what this fourth line will end up being. I suspect Reedy and Chmelevski have really locked in those two spots for these last 2 games, but the last spot on the wing or at center, if Weatherby does play, is still up for grabs. When it comes to the defensive side of things, we have Burns and Ferraro as the Sharks' top pairing, which was once again rather solid, did a pretty decent job at limiting some Anaheim Ducks chances. The Ducks tonight were a team that weren't dominating the offensive zone. They weren't just completely cycling it like we saw, let's say, the other day against the St. Louis Blues, but they had their few chances here or there. So Burns and Ferraro were at times, I guess, victimized by these rush type of plays from the skilled Anaheim Ducks players like Zegras, like Terry, like Milano. But when it came to actually defending in their own zone, I thought they did a relatively solid job. And another pairing that I do actually want to talk about here tonight would be the Sharks' last pairing of Merkley and Vlasic. Now, of course, for the past many games at this point, I have continuously mentioned Ryan Merkley, and I'll do so again right now, or actually in a bit, but I want to actually talk a bit more about Vlasic here tonight because I thought he had a very solid game as well. He actually mixed it up a bit offensively, which was nice to see. His defensive game was not too bad either, and we do have to consider the facts that the Sharks are, coming off a game like a better team with Vegas, and then a couple of games ago with a better team like the St. Louis Blues, and here tonight they were against easier opponents like the Anaheim Ducks, but still I thought Vlasic had a really solid game, which is, I guess, nice to see just based on the general feeling of this season where Vlasic has been more so poor than he has been all that good. But speaking of Ryan Merkley, his pairing, which I guess would be the most interesting player on this one, even though Vlasic had a decent game, I would like to say that Merkley impressed me here tonight. I thought on the offensive side of things, he made a lot of very nice plays at the blue line. He had a lot of very nice passes as well. And while there were definitely still a couple of times where he was overthinking the play, I would say, and then overplaying it as well, and that would cause maybe a couple of giveaways here or there, I thought generally it was actually a very positive game from Ryan Merkley, and I feel as though that was also reflected in the ice time he ended up being given here tonight. And finally, we will talk about the Sharks goaltender Kähkönen was on a 2-game winning streak for the Sharks, and considering previously he hadn't had a win with the Sharks before that, and even a win in the entire year. A 2-game winning streak is actually rather impressive, but here tonight, not really his best game of the season, you definitely could say. The Zegras one is a stoppable shot, though I will give him the benefit of the doubt that this is still rather difficult in exactly the position that Zegras positioned this shot. When it comes to the Comtois goal, I also don't really blame him much on that one, but it's actually the other 2 goals that I was somewhat disappointed with. The Milano one was a backhand where you could argue there was some traffic in front of Kakinen, and of course backhand shots are rather unpredictable, but still this was one that you'd like to be able to see the save on. And then especially the Mahura goal as well. This one has no traffic, and it's not as though Mahura is some sort of noted goal scorer. This isn't as though Austin Matthews is coming in with 0 traffic in front, but has just an absolute rocket of a shot. No offense to Mahura, but he's not some sort of elite goal scorer, as you can tell by the fact that he only has 3 goals on the entire season. And so I really thought that Kakinen could have made the save there as well, especially when you consider the situation of the game at the time where the Sharks were only trailing a single goal. So not a great game from Kakinen, not awful either, and I wouldn't put so much blame onto him, but he definitely could have done better. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday, where they will take on the Edmonton Oilers for a final time this season. And we'll see, since the Oilers are heading to the playoffs, if maybe there's a couple of players getting rested a bit. I believe they have locked in second place in the Pacific Division, and as such, they will be facing off against the Los Angeles Kings in the first round. So it's possible we don't see someone like McDavid in this game. We don't see someone like Draisaitl in this game, but who knows what will end up happening. Class dismissed.